Um, Good afternoon. I'm Paolo Bertoldi. I'm going to run this last part of the workshop discussing supply obligations. And of course, this has also a strong relation with the Energy Efficiency Directive, but I'm not just talking about the Energy Efficiency Directive in Article 7. And I co-share in this 2-hour slot with Tina Fawcett from the Oxford University. I'm, by the way, working with the European Commission Joint Research Center, but I'm not presenting today as a Commission official. I'm mainly presenting as a researcher, and says that is research that we did since many years. And the second point, we try to do more like a classroom session. So you are free to stop me anytime, ask questions, as long as they're not too difficult. And so we have more an interactive workshop. And also, it's always very difficult to judge when you're preparing something long how much you know about the topics. I know some in the room knows a lot, like Erwin. In fact, he did the same work presentation 2 years ago when I couldn't come to the training workshop. So it was really a lot. But also for, and I noticed when I saw the list of participants, there are some students inside, which I guess maybe they are less familiar with energy efficiency policy, or maybe they want to learn more. So I started from very general principles. If you know everything, just tell me and I can skip the slides. So we save time. Maybe I'm a bit early since it's such a nice day. So basically, I want to present you what are energy efficiency obligation or energy obligation energy companies. Sometimes they're called white certificates, and how these now are also introduced in the Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And in the second part, she goes more into the details how Article 7 has been implemented. So this is how we complement each other. So when we're talking about, from a theoretical point of view, on the market instrument, we try to identify policy which create a market, put in a frame, a general target, and then allow competition or innovation ideas to think how best to implement this policy target. It's an old concept started in the 90s when we wanted to reduce pollution, for example, NOx or sulfur emissions from power plants. The first cap and trade schemes emerged. Then it was used for renewables, putting an obligation on power generator to have a certain share of renewables or buying certificates. And more recently, but is already, we're talking about almost 15 years ago, has been applied to energy efficiency. One step back and saying that in Europe, but is already presented by Yamina, we have targets for 2020, target now for 2030s. And we have two major directives linked to this target. The first one was 2006 Energy Service Directive, which has now been closed, superseded by the Energy Efficiency Directive, but introduced first time a 9% energy efficiency target to be reached with by 2016 by energy efficiency measures. The target was very, say, limited, not that important, but the first time related to this target, there were discussion among expert policymakers and reflected in legislation about how to measure energy efficiency. Because before there was no much, I mean, individual country had their own methodology, not very much discussed, but in the frame of we started to work on the so-called bottom-up, top-down methods, define different type of energy savings that can be evaluated with dim savings or other things. Was a famous project UNIS, and then we at the JRC produced a document on harmonized methods that is still very much valid also for the white certificates. And then we had the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also, I mean, as Yamina mentioned, we had also a liberalization of the electricity market, so now unbundling between generations and distribution and suppliers. Everybody is free to select their suppliers. So also from the market perspective, more interest to do additional services, because just competing on the price of fuels is not enough to keep or retain your current customer or gain new customers. So these, of course, are the famous targets for 2020, which are a solid number for those who come from outside Europe. And these, of course, these are the targets for 2030s. Still into discussion, the energy efficiency target is a minimum 27%, but could be more. The Parliament and EMEA calls for 40%. There are studies right now, an evaluation for seeing the impact of different options ranging from 30s to 40s and see the cost and benefits. The Energy Efficiency Directive is very important because basically introduce the 2020 targets, ask the member states to adopt their own targets. We are always talking about non-binding targets, but at least the member states have to come up with their own target, and it has been already indicated that the sum of the individual targets does not bring us down to the minus 20%. I think there is a gap of 4 or 5%, but we are most probably already doing much better, because it looks like we're going to minus 20% or very close. Due to a number of reasons. And there are some very important things that was stemming from the EST, was the concept of National Energy Efficiency Action Plan that was introduced by EST. First one was in 2008, and everything gets a new plan, and that was kept by the EED. By the way, also the 9% by 2016 target has been kept also in the EED. Because we need present the national strategy to reach the 2020 target, including evaluation of policies, and was a long process because. That's good. Yeah, sure.
Is the 9% that we have in ESD equivalent to 1.5% that we have in EED? How did you?
Yes. No, really, no. No, because the 9% is 1% of total energy consumption, while the 1.5% is sold energy excluding some sectors. So there's a bit of this different, they're not exactly overlapping.
The 9% was voted in 2016, right?
2016, yes. You have to, remember say that to demonstrate that they save 1% of per year of the previous 5 years consumption. So it was an average. If one country was consuming 100 terawatt hours per year, it should have saved 9 terawatt hours over a period of 9 years.
So 1.5% sounds right.
No, from 2014 to 2020.
So we have an overlap between.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
I think there are different targets. I mean, the 1% is mandatory. The 1% is not mandatory. So there's also that difference. Anyway, so the Energy Efficiency Directive is very important. And so my presentation is not about this, but just to give you an idea. As the 2020 target as mentioned, the voluntary national target, and then as also the concept of the energy efficiency obligation, Article 7, which is the focus of this presentation, other cross-sectoral articles or policy, like the introduction of mandatory energy audits for large companies, some information to be provided to consumers through metering and billing, especially heat metering, consumer information and energy efficiency funds, then some article related to specific sector buildings, the renovation, the strategy for the renovation of existing buildings, measures on the public sectors, the renovation of the central government buildings, public procurement, and also measures on the energy supplies. On industry and transport, there are not many measures. I would say the audit is the only relevant measures that is in there.
There are no savings on the audit.
from the audits, no, these audits are supposed to generate savings because you identify measures that then somebody can help the company to implement. In fact, it's mandatory to have an audit in large companies, but member states should also create audit scheme for SMEs. This complements and is on top of the EPBD, which Yamin has already presented, is an important directive for the building sectors, setting a frame and leaving a lot of freedom to member states how to set the building codes for new and renovated buildings. There is a clause also which calls for near zero energy buildings by 2020, which again leaves a lot of freedom on the definition of what is a nearly zero energy buildings. Very successful product regulation, eco-design, starting with appliances, they move into lighting, they move more to industrial commercial products. The CO2 performance standards for cars advanced that Tim mentions, rollout of smart metering, and increasing financing schemes at European level, especially energy efficiency funds, structural funds, etc.
Is there an evaluation of the effect of the
There is basically the market trends for equipment. We see that the equipment is becoming more and more efficient. And yes, so this we can say how much energy has been saved. Of course, a combination of efficiency, labeling, and sometimes also financial schemes that subsidize more efficient equipment. I'm just mentioning this because when we talk about the supply obligation and additionality, we will refer back to this policy that are existing policies. But of course, when we look at the national level, the policy is even bigger in terms of numbers. And so more policy we have, like in some countries, energy taxation, information and campaigns, let's say building codes, energy audits, voluntary programs, especially for industry. A lot of member states have this type of policy. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Netherlands, UK, and more try to agree within those different levels of efficiency. And this is very important because when we discuss supply obligation, it's very important also to understand how this policy will interact with our policy, if it's really needed or not. That, for example, there are member states with a long tradition of energy efficiency policy, like Germany and Netherlands, that decided that there was no space to introduce a supply obligation because it was just would have been the additional benefit in terms of saving will be so small given already the existing policy, and even overlapping there might be counterproductive effect. So when we move more to supply obligation, we have some definitions, some starting point, which is basically there is a regulation usually or national law which impose a saving target on certain sectors. Could be, for example, the energy suppliers or the energy generators or the energy distribution. Sometimes the saving that this company have to produce in order to meet their obligation are certified by a third party, so we call it usually white certificate, just to differentiate for the very well-known green certificates, and sometimes the allowance for DTS are called them brown certificates because they're linked to coal. I don't know, specifically black might be, but and sometimes we take this certificate and create a market for this certificate, so we call it tradable white certificates. When this certificate has also a value itself, a market, somebody owns these certificates and can be transferred the property to another actor. In theory, this policy instrument has been introduced following, I will say, experience with other market-based instruments because they're supposed to be very cost-effective. It creates some incentive and some competition to find the cheapest implementation on energy efficiency. So this is why we call it cost-effective, which maybe is not the best thing, but at least in the initial phase could be very, very good to promote quickly energy efficiency in a country. Is usually seen as an alternative to an energy tax. Energy tax fix basically a price, but you're not sure about the quantity. Here on the other side, we fix a quantity, and we leave the market to compete for the price. So this is the basic theoretical background, which I don't want to take much time to explain. And you can also have this scheme usually has low transaction cost because, as I say, there is always the tendency to try to optimize the system, and in theory is very also aligned with the liberalized energy market where there's free competition and subject under competition try to diversify their investment. As I said, whenever there is also a certificate, is very interesting because the savings are measured and verified. So for the monitoring and the evaluation of this type of policy is very easy because we have already the energy efficiency measured at the individual level. So it just matters for a certain authority to sum up the savings and they say this policy has saved so much in a year because it's well documented and verified. And perhaps it's the only, I would say, policy where the evaluation is easy, straightforward, doesn't need complicated assessment. For example, as you mentioned, the building codes is more complex, or even sometimes standards are labeled. As I said, the certificates could also be a tradable commodity, so something which you pay VAT that has somebody owns and can claim at any time. Usually, is the project, whoever implements the project, who has the right to certificates, and then this is transferred against the transfer of money to a obliged party directly, the utility, or via an intermediary like yes, who implemented the project, gets certificated and then is sent on to the utility. Just one more sentence. This is, of course, in an ideal world. In reality, it's not the end user as his own certificate inside the utility. Usually, it's the utility proposing the project and making you sign a disclaimer that they can get whatever certificate is generated or a saving generated by the project. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was wondering if the price or the value of the white certificate is fixed, or is it like defined by the market, like the green?
It's defined by the market. So it's very much depending from the target that there is, so on the scarcity or abundance of energy savings to meet this target. So if the target is very low, most probably there are a lot of, the price is very low because it's very easy. If the target is very high, there's a scarcity in the market because it's not easy to find energy savings out there to meet this high target, and so the price goes up. Very similar to ETS, where depending on the cap that this company gets and on the rules, the price may go up and down. But what is then setting the price is always the market. Yes.
As you made the announcement, I understand this market of carbon emissions certificates is paid in 3 editions already.
Yeah. It's steady because it was, I would say, not designed properly or designed in such a way that was a bit favorable to industry, first of all. And then we had a big recession, a big crash in productions, industrial production. So company was discussing because everything that is related to always absolute emissions. Never think. So you were producing the 100%, and they were giving you allowance for 90%, and meet the 100% emissions, giving a cap for 90% if you have to improve your efficiency or reduce emission by 10%. But then your production declined to 80%, so you were already under your cap by the economic situation. So no need to do any effort. Abundance of allowance in the market, but it was selling this surplus of allowance because they were doing better, and the price crashed. So now they're trying to put some remedies to boost again the ETS. So this is the allowance for emitting CO2, and hopefully the market price will return to higher values. But it's a bit different from energy efficiency, because in energy efficiency we had a lot of other additional criteria that I come to explain later on, like additionality, for example, and other things. Okay. So just saying that it's energy saving certificate is very similar to a green certificate. A green certificate is something different from the green electricity. It's associated with that, but it's sold in another market. It's a parallel market. And it can be traded. So you can buy renewable energy, or you can buy also certificates. It means that you are purchasing the good things about renewable energy, and you're supporting green energy even if you don't use it. The same with the energy saving certificate. Its value is set by the market. It's not the value to save energy. It's a value set by the market according to the market principle and the scarcity of these certificates against a certain target.
I'm quite skeptical about the potential success of our certificate schemes based on my experience and CHP certificate scheme and grid certificate schemes. It all has to do with the dynamics of the marketplace to respond to price signals.
Yeah.
And in those markets, they are not always that dynamic. Being able to listen to price signals.
Let's say that
there's certain things that, well, very basic to have a group price signal with the EEOs, there is a surplus, and also in the certificate scheme, the farm was in surplus, and there are no ways or limited ways to eliminate the surplus, go back to a demand.
I think it always has to do with the target, how ambitious is the target, and energy efficiency is also different because you have so many technologies that can compete. While CHP is just CHP, or renewables just few generation options. So
That's the reason why the Danish green certificates because it has such a variety of components that can be in, that can generate green certificates.
Okay. But it's also that most of the generation costs are very much similar using CHP or renewables, while in efficiency you can have a big difference between different. So if a country or a region want to introduce white certificates or supply application, by the way, this is done in Europe, in the US state level, in some of the Australian states. So it's a policy instrument quite common nowadays. I think also now in Brazil a couple of years ago. So, and so it's important first of all to set a target, to specify, of course, an energy saving target, to specify which project are eligible to be accounted as energy savings against which baseline, to have a monitoring verification. So for the first time you have to calculate is monitoring the savings that you, with the project you achieve against a set of rules, and then somebody has to verify these savings. Need a penalty system if somebody, an entity has an obligation and is not meeting the obligation, will have to pay a penalty. Otherwise, why to bother to make this obligation? And of course, need some, transparencies in the process to, but more than verification. This is another way to put the same thing. So first you start to create a target. Usually target are national level, so has been so far done in always like this in Europe, while with the Article 7 or the US experience was different, was already the target was defined in terms of sales, percentage of sales, In Europe, we started when this scheme was introduced, it started from the national target, and then this was apportioned to the obliged actors, which usually are energy company. Then you need an infrastructure for checking that the system is working properly. So usually it's an energy agency, a market regulators, a body with competences, has impartiality, and can check the system. You don't leave to, for example, the utility association to police themselves because you usually don't trust it. Let's say the sanctions for non-compliance are essential, even if have been very rarely used, because if the sanction is much higher than the cost to implement energy efficiency, why pay a sanction? It's better to implement efficiency. Another important point is that the utility have a cost implementing efficiency as any other actor. So we want them to do efficiency, but we don't want to penalize them because there are, as any other economic actor, should not be penalized if they behave correctly. So the idea is that they should recover this cost. And this is also very much in line with this new concept that Emina presented. If energy efficiency is a resource, we recognize this as any other resource as a cost. And a utility, for example, when they have a simple scheme they generate, they can recover in the tariff the cost of the generation. So it's logical that if they implement energy efficiency, they have a cost in implementation of the efficiency, they should allow to recover this cost. And it's very evident that, and I show later on, that the cost of efficiency per kilowatt hour saved is lower than traditional generation, but still is a cost. But it's also the cost of recovery. There are two major options, usually for regulators or authority in charge of this scheme. One is if the imposition is on regulated entities like distribution company or generation company, but in this case they're not so much anymore regulated in Europe, the cost can be fixed by law. They can recover so much per kilowatt hours after certain limits. While if it's imposed on suppliers, which are usually deregulated, they can charge the client whatever type they want. The cost recovery is done by market force. So I know what it costs me. I know how much I can recover, because if I ask too much money, they will switch to another supplier. So it's a fine-tuned balance, but more or less we see in both options that the bills of the end user go a bit up. Everybody pays for the scheme, and this will provide the money for the scheme and the investment utility do. So it's also important to understand that energy efficiency does not come for free. Somebody has to invest. In this case, we ask the utility to invest, but they will collect the money from the end user. And end user, as globally, they will benefit because they pay a little extra that is generating savings, which are better than generating the same amount of energy. But some will pay and some will benefit, because not everybody gets an energy efficiency measure. So it's also is a point to take into account. And sometimes this is misinterpreted because consumer, they say, why we have to pay 3% more on our electricity or gas bill for this energy efficiency policy. And perhaps they don't get the concept that many of them will benefit from this, and the benefits are higher, outweigh the cost, but we'll say some will pay, some will benefit. And this is, for example, the pricing to the simplification.
And that's our energy efficiency obligation was made smaller because of concerns about costs. If this was the part that goes in the electric price to taxes,
yes, and it should be different. Should not be taxes. Should be other obligation that you have to pay. Like in Italy, we have one item which is called renewable support schemes and one item which is energy support schemes, but they are very small. I mean,
because I checked the energy taxes, and surprisingly, I checked this just recently. For me, a huge surprise that when you are in the low consumption bands, the taxes are higher than when you are in high consumption bands. So basically, the more you consume, the less you pay taxes. This doesn't encourage people to save energy.
No, but what it is, in which member state? Because
all member states,
no.
The only exception for electricity is Italy and Greece.
Okay.
And then, that is only for electricity, because for that it's the same everywhere. So this doesn't encourage people to save energy, basically. It encourages us to consume more energy. And the other thing, in case of renewable consumers, it puts them in the situation of poverty. Parameters.
The energy tax should be proportional to the consumption, and plus you also VAT, which is very important. Okay, I'll open. Yeah. But it's not.
No, the rich network cost is something different. Because in Eurostat, you have data, the energy price is broken down into 4 components, and one of them is tax.
Yeah.
Taxes and final tax on consumption.
No, there's excise tax plus. Yeah. No, it's much bigger than the value tax. Energy tax. It depends also if we talk about fuels or electricity or gas.
No, it's electricity and gas, they check.
Okay.
They check this for household.
We can keep this discussion offline.
I was surprised to see that.
We can. Sorry.
Yeah.
The cost for developing the energy saving target is actually within the distribution government because it's an obligation at first and the distribution operates. And then they develop the cost. But then it's within the distribution cost actually.
It's in the network.
Yeah.
Okay, we check the network back.
Also, the grid certificates are part of it,
Yeah.
the CHP certificates are part of it, and the energy savings are part of it.
Yeah.
Besides the cost for maintaining and expanding the grids.
Yeah. We have the same in Italy with cost recovery.
They didn't look at data for network, they didn't only for taxes.
Okay.
They were surprised.
Okay. And perhaps we should collect bills from all Europe and get a lot of surprises.
No, they are in Eurostat.
Yeah,
so
but
basically you just have to look at Eurostat file. You have 100%.
Okay. So I would like to give some example, and my part of the presentation, which would be shorter than the later before to Tina, I'm basically using example before the ED. So what was working well and was well analyzed and well understood. Example from UK, Italy, France, Flanders, and Denmark. Poland was still very complex, it's started recently, and we're not sure it's working. And Tina did more of an update on other member states that as consequence of the ED. So after 2012, they decided to implement this policy because it was asked in Article 7, unless they opted for alternative measures. I'm also going to explain how it works. For which we have barely information on the implementation, the results, because 2014-15 usually takes a couple of years to data to do some analysis. The other point that perhaps when the colleagues wrote this directive and it was published in 2012, starting 2014 implementation, is that in all these member states that started the scheme, it took 4 or 5 years to get the scheme up and running. I know Italy started in early 2000 to discuss it, and the scheme took 5 years before the scheme took off. A lot of details to discuss, cost recovery, how to apportion the saving to each individual obliged party, how to do M&D, who was doing the verification, and you need a discussion, legislation. So it's not something that you set up. And then a utility is a subject to produce, generate, or sell, distribute energy. Never heard about energy efficiency before, so how they change their business structure to operate energy efficiency. And I guess the same process may have happened in the US. We know the US utilities are very advanced. They have teams of energy efficiency experts in evaluation, but mostly it took years for them to build this expertise. So you cannot expect that you impose a law and then the day after entities is geared up to deliver savings. Most of the scheme are some period of application, and what is also important that the target always ramp up. So from a very modest target to, I would say, quite an ambitious target. Some schemes like in Italy and Denmark is an annual target, so every year is a target, is your own complex and wide target, and they have to show certificates or showing that they've done savings in that year for that amount. In some other scheme like UK and France, it was a 3-year period or 4-year period, so they had more time to organize themselves. At the end of the 4 years, they have to meet their own target. Savings, again, come back. Sometimes are denominated in carbon, sometimes in primary energy, sometimes in final energy, sometimes first year only savings. So each project accounts for this first year, 1 year only savings. Some are cumulative savings. You can imagine if I do an insulation project with lifetime of 25 years, the huge difference between counting only 1 year savings and counting 25 year savings. Basically, a member state, when it's faced with the goals or the task, to introduce this policy, they have a number of options, and we see a lot of variation before DD and even more after DD. So first of all, the target. Now with DD is the target is fixed, before was left the member state. Then if you, and it's still open in the ED, if you select to do measure everything in primary energy or in final energy, has some advantage and disadvantage, of course. Primary energy, you can account for the CHP. If you measure in final energy, it's very difficult to capture the benefit of CHP. But also in primary energy, you may discriminate, you may favor the saving electricity because you only have a factor 2.5. So there are pros and cons. Then who are the obliged actors? So usually it's distribution or retailers company. And who are the eligible actors? Do some other market actors are allowed to gain certificates to certify a project and then enter them in the market or transfer them to the utility under obligation or not? Sector cover. Should we just target the residential sectors or the building sectors, or allowing all sectors with the exclusion of, and we see a lot of variation here. Then is the lifetime of measures, and also the concept of additionality, which I come back. How we do the measurement and verification. The cost recovery is on the distribution cost, or is it free to which obliged party to set it. How this scheme interacts with other policies, and this goes back to the concept of additionality. Of course, you don't want anybody to claim savings that are deriving from other policies. For example, if you have a building code or appliance standards, that should be the floor, and everything that is above that could be claimed. Sanction and trading rules are the other topic. So there's some example. I try to go fast because there's not much time. So some country, Italy and Flanders, decide to target primary energy. France and Denmark primary energy. UK use always carbon, but it was an equivalent between energy and consumption and CO2 emissions. And already discussed annual versus non-annual, multi-annual saving targets. And this is an example, for example, from Italy, but it's I look at like from France. This was already very challenging when I was screaming in my kids, you cannot do this. And of course, the first time we announced just this, and this is impossible. And then they understood that it was good for utility efficiency. They couldn't even make money with this cost recovery because in Italy, it might be a big mistake they did it. But it was a fixed amount, so for so much, it was denominated in ton of oil equivalent, and for each ton of oil equivalent saved, it was getting 100 euros. And the cost, especially in the early phase, yeah, and then when I was still not a single project, the cost was a third a quarter of that. So they were really making money. So they could easily arrive to results here. And yeah, they started getting to complain because it was high. And of course, at the same time, a lot of cheap projects either were implemented or they were ruled out. And the typical rule out that happened more or less everywhere in Europe was CFLs. In 2005, both CFLs were still a very good measures. Now that we have the eco-design that stays out incandescent and halogen, doesn't make sense to do CFLs, and now we have an even better LED lighting. So the utility ran out of very cheap measures, and here they're looking for more expensive project to implement. But in any case, the target has ramped up. Sorry, and you can see also in the UK on that graph, you can see that the carbon savings here, the thermal they increase over the year. Phase 1.1, 7.8, and 40.2. But because there is a learning process, they understand how to do efficiency, they understand where to find project, they can optimize their costs, so they're more happy to. And the same was also for France and for Denmark. And this was the target of France. Again, when this was 54 terawatt-hours first period, again, seems almost impossible. And then second period was almost 6 times more. They added the transport fuel distribution company. And what I didn't say that in all the scheme, the targets was always met. So I think maybe at the beginning was too gentle to start, but it's fact. And then the French announced the third period, which is even more than the second period. And again, compliance by utility, but then we see the project are already happening and delivering savings. And this is the Danish Target. Just a quick word on how the different countries have decided to on the major technology sectors. So Italy allows all end-use sectors. You can do a project in transportation, in CHP, in optimizing your distribution grid, and of course efficiency in industry and buildings. UK, when it was running, but still existing this policy, only the residential sectors, and with addition that the distribution, so the suppliers company had to put focus on the fuel power household. So a part of saving the ring fence for this type of population. So a social aim included in the policy. You step in if I whenever mention something about the UK. Denmark did not allow the transport sectors, flying the centralization, non-energy intensive industry and service sectors. Yeah. Okay, was included.
Was included.
Yeah.
But then you have also the governments and actually you have two.
Yeah. And France again, everything, excluding the ETS industry. What is so? Not only the sectors, but it's also the fuels, and the obligation is mainly on the gas and electricity supplier, distribution company. But in France, is also including the distribution of heating oil and distribution of transport fuels. So a company like Total, doing mainly transportation fuels, is also under obligation. And so it generates also a lot of competition, because I sell transport fuels. I don't reduce maybe transport fuels consumption to any resident transport, but I go into buildings, which is easier to do. And if I sell gas, maybe I do electricity project. So it's not that there's a straight away connection between the obligation target and the reduction of your own consumption. You can play with the competitor's client or to go to another field. I think, and of course, in some schemes, like in Italy, also some renewable projects were allowed. It's like solar, water heater, photovoltaics, eco-generation, district heating. But it's, again, it's depending a bit on the scheme. So I already covered this slide. In the UK, in the early phase, so we're looking about the CERT, being a scheme mainly focusing only on the residential sector. The number measures were quite limited. There were efficient appliance, efficient lighting, efficient boilers, loft insulation, and cavity wall insulation. So more or less these were all the projects that were implemented. Majority of savings were due, of course, to the cavity wall and loft insulation, but also a lot of CFLs were sold in the schemes and previous schemes. While in Italy and France, there was an hypothetical list of more than 200, 300 type of projects, so a lot of diversity. And a company with this free to choose do CFLs or do an industrial plant, a refinery doing the efficiency. Of course, from a theoretical point of view, a more open scheme offers more possibility to find the cheapest solution, but sometimes the policy wants to focus on specific sectors. So again, there is no conclusion you can draw. I think both options could be valid and depends what are the national policies, what are the policy instruments, and what you want to really achieve. You want to improve efficiency in the residential sector, you want to have also social aim, so you want just to, whatever type of efficiency is good for the country. Of large party, some member states going for suppliers, so company who have a direct contact with the client will sell energy as their business, now liberalize, and they constantly they have a good relation with the end user. They have a marketing perspective because they want to gain more end users, so maybe for them to add the efficiency business could be an interesting business development. And as a transformation from really a seller of kilowatt hours to a seller of efficient solution or energy services. On the other hand, distribution company are a bit detached from consumer. They are, they provide the service as well, but it's usually to bring the energy to the home, but they do sell energy. What could be good about them that they are more stable because are less subject to, usually they are local monopolies, or less subject to competition, so suppliers can go and come on the market for distribution and sunset. And in most countries are still regulated, so it's much easier to attach a fixed cost recovery to the cost that they can charge for their distribution services. But again, the scheme seems to work well when there's the obligation of suppliers and also when it's on the distribution company. So no, again, cannot draw any conclusion. Both the options are equally valid. And I think, I don't know what are under Article 7, but most probably still again in Europe of distribution supplies company. Different way than if you, as I said, before the ED we had a national target that then was apportioned to the single economic operators, and so usually was based on sales or number of clients, and now is a fixed amount. So I think the amount is fixed at national level, so 1.5 is at the national level. So I don't know how this portion, if it's proportionate to each other. But it's something we should explore, how the portion of the target to individual entity is done. In France, for example, there was also a component on the linked to the turnover of the company to apportion the target. So on the measurement and verification, the concept of baseline is fundamental. The savings should be additional to other policies, for example, efficiency standards, but also to what's happening already in the market, because we should not pay for what is already something that is taking place. So it should be something additional that causes additional savings. And so it's very important to understand this point, and I come back later if I have time. And there was a long discussion on these topics, in fact, on the additionality, especially taking the example of common appliance which was to the boilers. An installed level of efficiency, which is very low because boilers tend to have a very long lifetime, so let's assume an efficiency of 70%. Then there was a market average of 80%, so already setting the savings above 80%. And then, of course, there will be the condensing ball at 90% or more. And so usually most schemes allowed only from 80 to 90. Some already factor in some efficiency standards even higher than the market. So was a lot of difference between members. And now Article 7 has clarified a lot how to set the baseline, but it's very important to understand that the baseline concept and how much of the saving can you attribute to the measures. Of course, when it's an appliance like a boiler, refrigerator, it's easier. When it's a building refurbishment, it's very difficult because you add something that was not there before, and the market trend is not so clear. There's not like everybody puts 3 centimeters, puts 10 centimeters, other yes or no. So much more complex the situation to judge for member state. Okay, I already covered this. This is a French slide in summarizing basically what I take from the French scheme, with this example of boilers. And of course, another important point that is common to scheme UK, Italy, France, that over time the baselines change because the eco design is changing, because the market is changing. So you cannot just say fix the baseline in year 1 and keep it the same, but your efficiency of the market or the policy change is always the additional market. And this is also why the savings, as I said before, may become more expensive because you have to go to very high level of efficiency, which may be very expensive. And at the end, you eliminate some technology because they're not, they are basically imposed by regulations. So you cannot, in typical example, eliminate the CFLs. Either there are already too many CFL on the market, or the regulation imposed to use a CFL or better. So that technology has to be taken out when it's not anymore eligible. And this happened in the UK, where you take out many years ago already the CFLs, same in Italy, same in France. And so, example is the condensing boiler, a very popular measure in the early years of this instrument. Now the regulation mandates regular condensing boilers, so eco design, so out of not possible anymore to subsidize the boilers and claim the savings. So already covered this. I think it's more information that I was designed to be a bit longer, 3-hour workshop, and even got slides. Sorry, but some example on different settings that were accounting also the easier baseline and also the lifetime saving versus the yearly savings. So maybe just a slide to summarize the cost. These are typical costs to a household in a year. The whole might be, in Italy it was 6.7 million per household. In UK it was 6.9 panels per year per field, so it was more or less double the existing gas fields. And it went out quite a lot, and this triggered some opposition in the population. But if you look at the save energy to the schemes, you know, it's less than 1 euro cents, so less than 1 euro cents, 1.72 euro cents. So lower than the cost of electricity to a household, but even lower than the cost of producing electricity. Same thing. So very cost-effective schemes. And of course, administration cost quite large if you want, but for large country with all 3 countries with a population of 60 million. So including all the evaluation and monitoring the schemes. Of course, this being up the problem, what happened if a small country, maybe like Luxembourg with a population of 500,000, because there's a lot of fixed costs when you do set up the monitoring verification, and you see maybe the cost may be higher. All the schemes succeeded always in meeting the target, very little use of sanction. Another point about trading or not trading, and then I finish on the floor. There are 2 very similar schemes. One is in France and one is in Italy, and both allow for trading. So with the difference that Italy allows the ESCOs to claim the certificates, while in France not, and also the difference between distribution company in Italy and supply in France. So in Italy, the decision, the attitude of majority of distribution company was that for them efficiency was not interesting. They prefer to buy on the market, leaving to the ESCOs to implement the project, and basically coming to them offering a certain price for the certificates. Even in Italy, there's a market exchange where you can just buy or trade bilaterally or buy according to options, so try to buy a minimum price. And this was the route followed in Italy, so very good for delivering the ESCO industry. Might be a bit more expensive because you have another steps between the client receiving the benefit and the utility, but successful. In France, the suppliers decided to implement themselves, or basically to implement through contracted by them, and negotiating the price of the actions. Even if in France it resulted that the contribution by utility was much smaller than in Italy, because they had more difficulty with the cost recovery. And so each large company like GDF or EDF implemented basically the project under the brand names with their own contractors, so they wanted to be seen as making a good proposition to the client, a package of efficiency. And this is why it resulted in very little trading. They didn't want to buy project from other operators. And so a very different route to achieve the same obligation. In the UK also the trading was very little used. It was not possible trading to certificate, but it was possible to trade the target. And in Denmark there was no trading allowed. So again, I cannot say it was good or bad. This Italian scheme. I think I stop here. I had some titles on Article 7, which you will introduce Article 7 and say what %. Okay, so I leave it now the floor to you. So thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. I'm afraid I missed the start of the workshop here, so if I'm repeating things that you've already told, just tell me and I will move on. I won't say the same thing again. My name is Tina Fawcett. I work at the Environmental Change Institute of Oxford University in the UK. I'm here on behalf of a project called ENSPOL, which is a European-funded project about Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. So we're a collective group of organisations who are helping countries understand and implement Article 7. As with Paolo, if you've got any questions or interventions as we go along, please just say what you want to say. This is the thing I'm going to cover. I'm just going to briefly tell you about the project and give you the website address so you can get our resources if you want them. Something about Article 7. Something about what member states are actually doing. So this kind of follows on from what Paolo has been saying. Something about alternative measures. This is anything that isn't an energy efficiency obligation scheme is called an alternative measure under Article 7. And then I'm going to kind of pick up some of the themes, again, with energy efficiency obligation schemes. What's happening? What do we know about what countries are doing in their new policies? Why might they want to do that? And what issues are we seeing, particularly what's going to happen in the future? Because, as we know, a lot have relied on a set of cheap and easy to install technologies that aren't necessarily available anymore, or certainly aren't additional in policy terms. So where are these schemes going to go? What's they actually going to achieve? I don't know what the answer is, but I'll be quite interested to know what you all think about that. Just briefly on Interpol as a project, there's 13 organisations, of which Oxford University is one. It's universities, energy agencies and other NGOs. We're having our final conference next week in Brussels, but actually the project runs for 3 months after that. So the project continues for 3 months after that, and we're hoping to have an ongoing sort of web platform and keep our information updated. But there's the usual sort of struggle about persuading somebody to pay to do that. So we're hopeful. And really it's a project, it's a very practical project rather than a very academic project, if you like. It's about assessing how the policy is working, improving knowledge about it, talking to member states, helping governments understand the experience in other countries, and strengthening collaboration and dialogue. So, for example, as part of our final conference, we're having various member state governments and experts come. We're going to have expert workshops, and we've been doing that nationally and at a European level. So it's a sort of action learning sort of project as well, I suppose. And just briefly, these are our, got 2 websites. The sort of bottom one is the newer version, which allows you to search for information by country and by policy type. So you can, you know, what's happening in France on whatever it is, and you can sort of drill down into the reports, whereas in the first, our other website that hasn't got, it doesn't split it into bits. So the information, some of the same information's in both, but it's perhaps a bit easier to get the bit you want on the new web platform. Yeah, so that's the sort of advert for Interpol, really. So Article 7. There was recently there was a research, a survey report by, I think, Energy Efficiency Watch, which was asking experts across Europe what they thought about energy efficiency policy in Europe, and they're asking if they'd ever heard of these energy efficiency policies. And Article 7 was the one that was least known. So I think about a third of the UK experts who were energy efficiency experts had actually heard of this policy. And across Europe, it's the least known bit of efficiency policy. It's probably the single most important bit in terms of amount of savings it will deliver, but it's not really, I don't think it's widely particularly understood, or there aren't that many people perhaps who understand it, should we say. Yeah, it's quite complex, and in a lot of cases countries just carry on doing what they were doing, but a bit more so. So they perhaps don't feel the need to talk about it in terms of Article 7, or in the UK's case in terms of European policy. You know, just this is what we're doing. Yeah, that's right. So it basically sets out how countries should achieve energy efficiency savings and recommends that they should, or that they could use energy efficiency obligation schemes, and if they're not going to do that, they need to do alternative measures. As I said, it's meant to deliver about half of the 20% target you've been hearing about. So in addition to Article 7, there's articles on audits and investment in public buildings and various other things that could happen that will deliver the rest of the savings. So it's deliberately flexible. It lets member states deliver their savings how they want to do it, which is partly what makes it complex, because it's so flexible, it's quite hard to know what's in and what's out. In theory, you can meet the savings targets in any sector of the economy at all. In practice, an awful lot of it is coming from the building sector, although the information is a little bit ambiguous because, yeah. So, because under Article 7, from my understanding, member states, the measures considered for relief should be new measures. There should be new measures and not regulatory measures that are under the EU regulation, right? And then we have, under Article 4, Paolo's team worked on this project, the renovation strategies. But we have on the renovation strategies that member states do not plan that many additional measures, and the measures that are ongoing are regulatory measures, and they're on EPD or whatever. So, of course, I couldn't make the, I cannot just say these measures in Article 4 correspond to these measures in Article 7. So, what are the additional measures? Do you see my question? Do you see my problem, the problem they have? Is that mean whether the savings are, well, because when it says most of the savings are in the building sector, what it means is that's what member states have declared where their savings are going to come from. Whether they're really additional to what's in EPBD, I think is a different question in a way.
There's what member states say. They say something like 40% come from buildings. There's a certain percentage from industry and transport, and then there's a lot which is cross-cutting, which means like a taxation policy, which could drive changes in any sector. So as far as we know, from what they've told us, they're expecting more savings to come from buildings than anything. But there are a lot of questions around whether some of those savings are really additional, whether they actually...
I don't think it's the case compared to what is in Article 4, actually, of my mind.
The Article 4 is a strategy.
But you have the measures. Because what we have...
The measures, especially in member states which use alternative measures, these measures are equivalent to the supply limitation. Member states which decide to supply limitation either continue the policy that I presented before, or a new member state will vote for this policy. Other member states say we have already existing policy which are taking the same, so we don't need supply limitation, and most of these policies are in the building sector. So I agree. For some of them it's just a very opportunity.
Article 7, my understanding, the measures in the alternative measures, the measures that are building measures, should not be the existing measures and should not be the measures that are resulting from the implementation of the EU regulations.
They shouldn't, that's right, they should be additional to other existing, so that's why they're mostly about renovation of existing buildings, because that's not strongly regulated, unlike new buildings, which is quite strongly regulated.
No, it should not be, because it was there already.
No, it can't, no, that doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be new. Yeah, it just has to be in addition to any baseline requirements in other European legislation. If it was an existing national policy that isn't mandated, isn't forced on the country by the European Union, that's fine. They can carry on with that. That will count.
Because the 5W, for example, you have 5W. In EPPD and other which applications that we have it also in ED, member states should put in place financial mechanism to renovate, blah, blah, blah. So the 5W is the consequence of that.
I think it's Sebastian's question.
Particularly we should have a regulation, we should have financial necessity, but you have no practical experience. So it's not
so anything without a quantitative target is okay under this.
But if you do that, no necessity actually.
Then basically you are cheating.
No, the measures that don't have quantitative targets are just measures, the examples of ways you can go about it. But Article 7 would be the savings I get.
So in my long presentation, there's a slide about the time from there. But one of the policy additionality. If our savings in addition to other policy or not. And here, this the decision was taken to only look at the policy which has started. So the building code, yes. But an article saying we should finance an education building was not taken into account. I mean, there are different types of additionality. The additionality, which is not compared to before after, so very large, very broad definition of additionality, business as usual additionality, or financial additionality. So, and depends which one you use, you can justify it.
All the details, but anyway, if you say that building code should not be considered under Article 7, right? That's what you said.
Problem. For example, in the UK, I think that's complete nonsense, but the UK government is standing by it and saying that's okay. So that it's very hard to interpret sometimes, this additionality stuff, and the link between EPBD and this Article 7 is just so few people understand it. We had an expert workshop in the UK where we thought we'd got all the people who knew most about it, and we're all sitting around going, don't know, not quite sure, how does it work? It's complicated, and it is hard to understand, which might partly explain some of the stuff I'll say later about, do we know how well it's going? You know, does anybody? Anyway, so I think this is my final point here, really. It's got these additionality requirements, which are hard to understand, and it's trying to influence the most difficult areas of policy to reach. So it can't be things where we put in product standards. It can't be things where we've got building standards for new buildings. It can't be any of those things where we've got very clear regulated standards already. It's the other stuff. So it's a difficult bit of policy. It's trying to catch everything that we haven't been able to make really nice, neat regulations on, essentially.
But you said that most of the savings, 42% come from building. At the same time, the highest percentage of savings we come from regulations, right?
Not under Article 7, no, because most regulations are I'll show you. I've got some figures on that. Okay, so just to be clear then, so Article 7 isn't all of policy, as we've just been talking about. It's a particular part of policy that is not already covered by other EU energy efficiency policies. So it's not EPD, it's not the UK Design Directive. It's Article 7 policies, this particular type of policy. And there might be quite a lot of national and sub-national policies that are in existence, but they're not reported by countries under this because they don't need to count everything they're doing because they're exceeding the targets that they would need to meet. So some countries, for example Sweden, are doing quite a lot of things that they don't put in they don't call an Article 7 policy because they don't need it to meet the targets they've got to meet.
What does happen when you overachieve that?
You get a gold star? I don't know. I mean, there is some carrying forward between phases, but we're not clear. But I mean, it's still the future beyond 2020 is still to be agreed, isn't it? So, yeah. Yeah.
Now we can carry over to the next year.
Yeah. I think there's a proper answer. So what are countries planning to do? This is slightly, well, probably too many different colours. But what this is saying is that some countries are having these energy efficiency obligation schemes, which are already in existence. Some are planning them, some are doing only alternative measures. So there's basically a mixture between only energy efficiency schemes, energy efficiency obligation schemes and alternative measures, which is the most common choice, and then only alternative measures. And this sort of changes a bit over time. But effectively, I think, depending how you count it, there's something like 17 countries are including energy efficiency obligation schemes, the policy Paolo was talking about. Most of them are new, and some of them are the sort of existing ones you've been hearing about in UK, Denmark, Italy, France, in particular, Poland, maybe. I mean,
Poland has 100% of their outputs obligations with
I've got the table later. Yeah, I think that's, but I mean, I'm quite uncertain about the Polish scheme. Perhaps you know something more about it, but because ENSPOL is a multi-country project, of course different partners have looked at the data for different countries, so I'm not equally good on answering about all of them. So I think what we can say is most member states have employed a mix of policies, whether they're efficiency obligation schemes or so-called alternative measures. Most of them have got quite a lot of things happening. Not everywhere, but almost everybody has got quite a lot of different policies happening. From tens of policies is typical. There's lots of different reasons why different member states are choosing different policy mixes, and in fact most policies are pre-existing policies. So it's, I'm not sure if I've got the figures here, but it's something like 2/3 of savings are expected to come from policies that were in existence before this Article 7 obligation came in. So they're extending what they were already doing. So it's your point about if they were doing it before it doesn't count, well it does, and they're continuing with what they know, essentially, which you could either think is a bad thing because they're not getting any policy innovation, or you could think actually it's a good thing because they're doing something which is tried and tested and hopefully they know it works already in their context. I mean, and so there's all this vast different array of different sorts of types of policy. But I mean, I would say most member states are probably trying to make the same things happen. The same sorts of, insulation, more efficient appliances, more efficient industrial equipment. They're trying to make the same sorts of things, changes happen in the real world. They're just choosing different policy routes to get there, which is kind of interesting. I'm not aware that member states are going for very different sorts of physical interventions that they want to happen. But, I'll be interested in your views on that. This is a bit too complicated, this graph, and some of it is slightly out of date, but what it's trying to show is where are the savings coming from. So across the bottom, in possibly not totally helpful, we've got all the countries of the EU. And this, at this end, this is 100% of savings are meant to be coming from energy efficiency obligation schemes. And at this end, 100% of the savings are coming from the alternative measures, so they haven't got. And then all of these people are the ones who've got a mixture. And the green ones, the dark green, are meant to be the ones that don't have white certificates, like Paolo was talking about. They haven't got this trading scheme, as you can see most of them do. So it's, and some of these figures now, like the UK percentage is lower now. So some of these have been revised as countries have submitted new Article 7 petitions. So this is slightly out of date, but the main point is just to show again this variation. There's a big difference between the policy measures countries are trying to deliver their savings. Yeah, right. But it's, there's a lot, almost too much information really. But so that's by country. This is another view. Now this graph doesn't come from the Untitled project. It comes from an updated evaluation done by a consultancy called Ricardo, who did it for the Commission. I'm not sure if it's published yet. It was meant to be. But anyway, this is their latest analysis of where energy savings is expected to come from different policies. So this is based on what the countries themselves have said will happen. They're not taking an expert judgment. They're just saying, what does it say in the sort of Article 7 and the NEEPs, wherever they can find the data on what's meant to deliver the savings. And as you can see, just over a third are meant to be coming from the energy efficiency obligation scheme. So that means 2/3 are coming from these alternative measures. After the energy efficiency obligation schemes, the next most popular measure is the financing schemes, and after that it's energy and carbon taxes. So there's a lot of sort of economic incentive type measures of one type or another. And then after that we've got some sort of regulations and voluntary agreements, standards and norms, and other sorts of policies.
You see, for example, we have some of the norms,
yeah.
It's 9%.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't see which some of the norms we could have in buildings, for example, it's not...
No, and I would suggest that's probably,
yeah,
with that, well, I mean, I suppose you could go even further than nearly zero buildings, couldn't you? You could sort of bring in advance some standards for new buildings and things.
So far, France, for example, is going to go for positive negative.
Mm-hmm.
This is the French definition of nearly zero in building. So they are not going beyond the French understanding of the French position of the directive.
Yeah.
So I don't see, in the case of buildings, I don't see which standards and norms you could have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly which policies are in there, and maybe those are mostly outside of the building sector.
In legislation, it's not easy. And I would say that the first round was probably not for this despite not because of the annex to the measurement. Now, the Commission is right now working in the EU region to get it right, making us more clear what's allowed in the Commission.
So I'm just going to say a bit more. I'm going to move on now a bit to talk about these alternative measures. So the 2/3 that aren't in the energy efficiency obligation schemes. I'll just say a bit about those, what we know about those, and then I'll go back to the energy efficiency obligation schemes again. So sort of pick up on a few points with those. Right, so another complicated graph, perhaps not totally helpful, but what this one does is it's not, this is different from the last one, it's not percentage of energy savings, it's just number of measures shown as a percent that each country has declared that they're bringing in and what type of measure they are as classified according to the Article 7 categories. So the dark green is energy and CO2 taxes, the light green is their financing schemes. This colour is regulations and voluntary agreements. So there's the different colours going up, and it's quite a busy graph, and there's all the countries across the bottom. I think what you see is there's a lot, as said in the previous one, this is a number of measures. Clearly there's a lot of these financing and energy and carbon taxes. Those are popular. you can also see that different countries, just like whether they've chosen an EEO or not, even within the alternative measures, countries have chosen rather different balance of policy instruments.
Do member states report the savings of they expect from each of the measures? For example, you have energy efficiency fund, and you have
that's right. So there'll sort of be usually, well, I suppose some sort of table, say policy number, whatever. This is the description. This is the whatever comes under it. You know.
Strange thing. But the strange thing is that in the Article 4, because each building savings are coming from buildings, so you have the savings on each measure for buildings here. And then Article 4, which is the remuneration strategies, we don't have the savings on the land measures by the states. And they are not provided. So we just have a line like that, financing, blah, blah, blah. We just have blah, blah. We don't have we don't know what corresponds to this blah, blah.
Well, yeah, well, people give numbers. I mean, you know, it's...
So this is ex cost savings. So it's saving the last year. The Article 4 is something for the future. So you cannot do it.
You just do it something.
Exactly, yeah. So
these are ex cost savings.
Yes.
Well, I mean, they're predictions, aren't I mean, these are the predictions of what they expect will be saved by their policies, and then...
I depend on what we do, because now at the end of the day, in April this year, this couple of months ago, at the first report of 2014,
okay, no, well, I think this is still from their Article 7 plans and their needs. Okay. So this is a prediction of what will be saved. It's not a reporting of what has been saved. Yeah, sorry, I should protect me.
Can I ask a question? This is fascinating data. I'm just curious, given that the previous slide you showed how the EU countries are doing it in different ways, it's really valuable information for countries outside the EU who might be thinking about that.
Yeah.
Do you think that this data will be helpful to inform other countries outside of various sizes, like you've got in your sample, of what sort of approach they might like to take towards doing these sort of obligation schemes?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. That's part of the idea of this project, by making it all public, as well as, you know, the other sources of information, that there's this sort of catalogue of how different countries are approaching things, and a bit of some critical analysis of what does that mean. And certainly as part of our project, we were looking at the experience of other countries, so in the US, states in Australia, you know, different places, to look at what we could learn from that to help the EU. So, yeah, I would hope so. I would hope it would be useful. So this is this text is kind of summarising some of the things I've been saying. Most of these measures are financial in nature. Perhaps that's not terribly surprising. There's a long, you know, when we know that regulations, as you've been making the point, a lot of regulations are outside the scope of this particular policy set. It's something countries know would work. Quite a number of countries have proposed energy taxes or CO2 taxes, and in fact, I think Sweden is their only policy that they report for this. There's also some support for the human side, so information, education, advice programs, but they're not tending to deliver high energy savings. But as we all know, life's a bit more complicated than that, right? All these policies are reported individually as if they don't interact, and I think we all know that's not true, but that's how they tend to be reported. Well, not all countries, but most countries are reporting them individually. So most policies have already said they're extensions of existing policies, and I think there is an argument that's quite a positive thing, but you've got to be careful about that. And it's a bit unclear as to where these savings are coming from in the alternative measures, because they're not required to say. So in terms of technologies, in the residential sector, it's sort of higher cost measures like whole house renovation or solid wall insulation are the sort of measures that are being supported. And in the building sector more generally, it's, as you would expect, it's sort of thermal envelope improvement.
But you see, when you compare to Article 4, you don't have this, you don't write the same conclusion.
Right, okay. Yeah.
From Article 4, you arrive to the conclusion that we support this report on the general innovation. From Article 7, you arrive to the conclusion that all innovation, so it's not general innovation, it's how I understand. And I think, I cannot say, I don't know if it's consistent, but I question the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, some of the things that happen in buildings are happening under the energy efficiency obligations, and historically they have paid for the cheap measures, and whether that is still happening, and therefore the things that get picked up by other policies, the stuff that you can't finance through those sorts of, or haven't historically been financed through those sort of policies. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point that we're just looking at one slice of policy, and there's this other set of reporting. It's something I'll pick up slightly later, and I've got a paper in a couple of days which gives more about concerns about monitoring verification systems that member states are putting in place. How do we know that these proposed projected savings will actually come about? Similarly, there's quite a lot of problems we've already talked about: additionality, double counting. You know, in NSPOL analysis, we found quite a lot of problems around that. That's exactly the same result as the Commission, the work done by the Commission has found. And in fact, Coalition for Energy Savings has also done a report finding there's quite a lot of concern around about just how reliable these projections of savings are, and the sort of feasibility risks around quite a lot of the policies measures. So there's quite a lot of concern about how good these policies on paper are actually going to translate into real life.
About projections, was from Article 3. We have some member states, two-thirds, I remember, have reported their projections per sector, projections between for buildings based on actually savings 2013-2020, based on Article 3, and what you have based on Article 7. And Article 7 are lower than Article 3, and I'm talking because there are a lot of savings for buildings that are coming from both sides. So that's how we explain that. But the funny thing is that we have some of these Technical 4, I don't remember which ones, where under Article 3, when they reported that the consumption will go up in the buildings, and here the consumption always goes up. So you don't have a case where it goes up, but we have a case under Article 3. We have cases where it goes up.
Right.
So it's interesting when you have them when you arrive to this conclusion. That
yes. Yeah. Yes. Which is interesting. I think I'm not going to dwell on this. Paolo's already did, so I was going to move on now and just say a few more things about the energy efficiency obligation policy, because that's, in a sense, that's a new policy for a lot of European countries, and so it's quite interesting, even though, as we've seen, two-thirds of the savings are not expected to come from those policies. It's of quite a lot of interest because so many member states are in the process of adopting that way of doing things. I'm going to skip over this general stuff because Paolo's already covered that. I think just one thing to say, well, just to briefly mention this, why are we having these? Why would you bother? Because quite a few countries have got very strong history, for example, Germany, in energy saving, considered to be leaders, just going, you know, we don't want one, we don't need one, we've got plenty of other stuff going on, it's really not for us. Oh, that's what they've been saying so far, anyway. And the question, and other countries, of course, have got a different history, have had them for a long time, so actually it is an integral part of the way we do things. So why might you want them? We've got, in NSPOL, we came up with this set of reasons, which is actually somewhat different from the set of reasons possibly you were thinking of. And I suppose one of our first ones was, is it a source of funding less vulnerable to political pressure, in that it's, you know, you're not taxing people to pay for energy efficiency, it goes on their bill. And certainly, even in the UK, which is highly sensitive to energy prices, very high, until about 3 years ago, nobody had noticed that there was possibly, I don't know, somewhere €70 a year going on their energy bills that was related to energy efficiency under this energy efficiency obligation scheme. And then suddenly it became quite political, along with the cost of renewables. And our government's taken a real step back, and we're going to get a lot smaller savings from the energy efficiency obligation scheme than we would have done prior to that. Now, there's all sorts of general politics going on there, as well as energy stuff. So whether it's really less vulnerable, it seems, even in the UK for a while, it did seem it was not vulnerable to political pressure, but then it became so. So I don't know whether that is, you know, obviously every country is different. As I understand it, in Denmark, they're doing a rethink of their energy efficiency obligation scheme at the moment, partly again because of concerns about cost, because it's got so much more ambitious. It is costing more. And the more it costs, the more noticeable it is, and the more people are getting concerned about it.
It has an advantage and it has a disadvantage. The advantage of not having it in the tax scheme is that indeed we can have a continuous scheme in which the politicians are not tempted to touch in times of the money constraints. On the other hand, systems can go out of costs. It's all with the green split scheme because there was no control system embedded in the scheme to control the overall costs. I see a less risk on that in the energy efficiency obligation, but that was what I observed in green split scheme.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a sort of open question really, and countries will be in a different place on that, but you know, maybe it's an additional source of finance, should be. You could say it reflects the polluter pays principle, in that the people who are paying, you know, of course, or, you know, it's a, you know, energy users are taxpayers as well, but of course not all, you know, everybody pays an energy bill, not everybody pays tax. So, you know, clearly there's arguments about distribution of costs and benefits there. You could argue it makes use of the expertise or customer contact of energy companies if you're setting the scheme on the retailers. But as we heard in Italy, you know, they just they just paid, somebody else did it. And in fact in the UK that's also pretty much true. Just a specialist industry grew up that went around and insulated thousands of walls or lofts or, well, the light bulbs they did themselves maybe. But so there was this idea that by having one of these schemes, you're going to turn your energy company that just makes money out of selling kilowatt hours, you're going to turn them into energy service obligation companies or companies that really care about, you know, what the cost of supply is, and, you know, therefore they're going to get the economic best cost by investing a lot more in customer and energy efficiency. And I mean, I think that's highly doubtful that that has happened to a major extent. Or maybe it has in some countries. There's an argument in Denmark that it has changed the way in which the energy companies operate.
It wasn't the case in France when we had the energy efficiency obligation scheme. So the obligation was on the grid operators and the distribution companies. And saving energy is what we call competence. And they are administered well, but actually, well, they just administered it. Yeah. It was not something that they did.
Yeah, I mean that's right. Like in the UK, I mean they've all, with one small exception, as Paolo said, they've always delivered the savings. No matter how much they whinge and moan at the start, they deliver the savings, and they usually do it for less than they thought it was going to cost. Not always, but nearly always. So they can do it, but they're not changing what they are. It's not creating a fundamental change in the relationship between those companies and their customers, I don't think. I mean, which is fine, but, you know, it's just that was one of the hopes, I think, years ago when this sort of thing started coming in, that those changes would happen, and it seems like they're not. Again, we've been through a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of variations across EEOs in Europe. I mean, there was a lot of variation, as Paolo showed, between the sort of long-established, successful EEOs in Europe. They're all quite different in their design and the number of obligated parties and whether they did trading or not. So it's not about finding a best design. You know, it's fairly clear that there isn't a best design. There's lots of, you know, pretty successful ways of doing this. And I mean, there's huge variation. If you look at the number of obligated parties who's actually got to do this, in the UK, I think there's 6, maybe 7 obligated parties. In some countries, there's thousands, if they include district heating companies. And it's hugely different in terms of what's the scale and the sophistication of the companies that are expected to get involved in this kind of scheme, which is, you know, it's quite amazing what a flexible policy it is. I mean, is it even really one policy? I mean, anyway, it's very flexible. Sectors, I'll show you a quick bit of data on this, but it can be from everything, including transport, to The most restricted ones are UK and Malta, which are just the residential sector. In terms of distribution of benefits, until fairly recently, most countries weren't particularly interested in using EEOs to distribute benefits to vulnerable households or fuel-poor households. The UK always has been. Again, it's part of this sensitivity around energy price and how that affects low-income households, because we still have a lot of people dying in cold winters. So there's a particular problem in the UK, but it's not just the UK, and this is coming into more schemes now, particularly in France. They're increasing the amount of the scheme focused on low-income households. So these schemes end up with multiple objectives. They're not just about energy saving anymore. In the UK, at one point, the scheme we've got now, it's trying to save, well, ours are set in terms of carbon, so it's trying to save carbon. It's trying to build the market for solid wall insulation. It's trying to focus on low-income, high-energy cost communities. It's trying to increase the skills in some of the sort of installation sectors. I mean, there's numerous aims. And I went to a discussion in the UK about where our scheme's being redesigned at the moment. And somebody proposed a new design, and that was being discussed at the sort of ministry. And I was counting the number of different objectives people talked about, and it was 20 different objectives people had come up with that this one bit of policy was meant to deliver, including stuff around peaking energy demand and costs and distribution and social things and environmental things and skills things. And, you know, it's when you're trying to meet so many different objectives of one piece of policy, it's difficult. It's difficult to see where it's going sometimes. And I think Paolo's already covered very well about trading, so I'm not going to say too much more about that. This is kind of very horrible to look at, but this is just looking at, all I've done here is I've made a little list of there's new and planned energy efficiency applications. These are new to the established ones, the ones that have been going on for quite some years. And I suppose the key thing in here is to look at, there's a huge range of what they're thinking they're going to contribute to their Article 7 targets, from sort of 5% in Australia to 100% in Luxembourg. Luxembourg, which doesn't actually yet have a system, really. So, you know, some very big numbers in there for countries who haven't actually run this scheme before, and I think we would be really concerned that you can't go from 0 to 100% really quickly. The rest of the world is just not going to work. And even in the more established schemes, you can see that in the UK, as I said, ours has become less ambitious than it was. So it's meant to deliver 21% of our target, whereas Denmark, they're thinking they will deliver 100% of theirs. So there's this huge range. And some of the new ones are, I think, have got unrealistically fast delivery based on our historical experience. It's just not likely to happen. And this is just, again, another, the details are not so important. It's just looking at whether it's the retailers and the distributors who are being given the obligation. Again, we've got the new and planned ones here and the established ones here. And the pink ones are the suppliers, and the blue ones are the distributors. So it's just to show there's a range. We need more people going to suppliers, but that can be, again, that could be just a few big companies or lots and lots of big companies, depending which fuels or sectors you look at. And in the sectoral coverage, again, most of them are this kind of, they're all sectors. There's a couple that are just residential, and then there's a mix of ones that are all sectors, but we won't do transport, or all sectors, but we've got to focus on residential. So different, again, lots of different solutions.
I wanted to say about running they needed 3 to 4 years before they really started to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the UK was, yeah, no, that's right. And in fact, me and Jan Rosenaar, who's done a lot of work on this, we did a report for the European Parliament where we were looking at how many years some of these countries say they'll deliver it. And if they haven't had a voluntary scheme, or they're not, like in the case of Luxembourg, they say that they're just going to, you're not doing something to accelerate your learning, the idea that you're going to very, very quickly introduce an ambitious scheme. Well, it goes against our historical experience, that's all we can say about that. I think I will skip this because we've done quite a lot on this already. I think I would just say there's the future challenges is how is this complex variable sort of policy, how is it going to adapt as the low cost opportunity, if the low cost opportunities are reducing, and some people say that they are not, but if they are, which some of the things we used to do a lot of in the UK, we can't do anymore because we've done them. Maybe that's just us. It's difficult to see how this policy could sort of really support deep and complex refurbishment of buildings, let's say, because then you're taking money from everybody and you're just giving it to a very few people. And that's very difficult in terms of distribution, particularly if there's sensitivity around costs. Or technical innovation, that's not really what this policy is good at, or behavioural change. So do you need to focus on different sectors? I suppose I wrote this in mind of the UK where we haven't. Of course, other countries have already. So that's and there was a conclusion from some of our other study partners that in some countries this policy is just not understood because nobody has any clue what it is, and that's a problem in terms of if it starts to get into political trouble, if nobody's heard of it, if nobody realises that's why they got their discounted light bulbs or loft insulation or wall insulation, where's the support going to be? So I think there's these challenges, and I'd be quite interested in what you've got to say, and I think just to well, no, I think I'll leave it at that. So it's not happening.
Another question.
Yes.
So what I did, I compared total energy taxes paid by households in some where the information is only for 15 countries. Total energy taxes paid by households. And for these countries, I also have the renovation markets, the energy renovation markets.
Okay.
How much is that? So I compared the two. So then this means that in Slovak Republic, for example, they would have used only 33 euros per dwelling, per occupied dwelling to renovate. So it's nothing. And in Denmark, which is the best example that you can identify, 596 euros and they have for dwellings, for occupied dwellings. So my question is, how do we ensure that the taxes that households are paying will go to the households to renovate their houses? I don't think there is a mechanism to do that actually. So because when I take the figure and they just divide it by the number of occupied dwellings, they end up with 33 euros and 596, which is not, you cannot even replace your border in both countries.
That's an interesting aspect. I think in Germany there is a law, and it's in the constitution. I think that segment of the society paying taxes should benefit from those taxes as well. So if it's a tax-based industry should benefit from it. And that had an impact on the side of the alternative in Germany, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. This tax, the energy tax also back then.
Yeah, it's different. Are you talking about taxes or the fees to pay for this? That's a different thing.
Goes to general budget.
Yeah, that's just government taxes. It's a separate line item.
Well, this money collected from the supply irrigation spend it on energy efficiency. It makes a big difference.
So how households contribute to this? They don't contribute?
They pay.
But it's like a fee. It's a different line item. It's not tax.
It goes to the external tax.
It's natural tax.
It's
tax.
yeah, but what is raised by to pay for supply irrigation goes back to energy efficiency. And general energy taxation goes to the general budget.
Yes.
Well, I do like the idea of using that money instead of spending it somehow.
Mechanism.
But then,
but it's already existing in some member states. They collect money, so especially dedicated component of the bills, and instead of going to supply obligation, they have a special agency spending that money on energy efficiency. Yeah, or tendering for projects like they do now in Germany for electricity. So it's a different policy measures. If you believe that it's better that several organizations to do energy efficiency or the utilities. So there's again money raised to put in a fund.
This money that is collected, where it goes in the energy price, which part, which component, how is it for? Because we don't have in the energy price that is reported to your site.
no, and you might not,
or whatever.
and you might not know.
We have taxes and levies. That's why I use taxes and levies because I thought this money goes there.
First of all, it's accounted as a tax levy because it's an additional thing that you have to pay and it's not In UK, since it's part of the tariff and the tariff are liberalized, you won't see. It's part of the cost.
No, everywhere you can do that analysis.
You cannot.
You won't be able to get data to do the analysis that you're asking for from your staff. So, but you can do it like on a case by case in terms of whether it's enough. I mean, because I think that's your question. How can this possibly be enough? You know, and I think.
No, I'm sure it's not enough.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
so right, but that's, I don't think going with your set is going to do the data.
No, so this means that this money that is collected here goes somewhere, but we don't know, right?
No, we do. No, we know what happens. Well, I think we know what happens to the money because the energy companies, certainly in the UK system, they have to report how many million of whatever different measure that they have put in and how that meets their energy saving, or in the UK case, their carbon saving target that they had to meet. And they will declare at the end of the period how much it costs them to deliver it, and then you can work out what the average cost for the consumer is. Now, we don't know how they recover the cost from the consumer, whether they charge everybody the same.
Maybe as a citizen, how do I contribute to this fund?
Pay your energy bill.
Okay, so it's part of my energy bill, right?
Yes, yes.
So if it's part of my energy bill, then it should be one of the components of my energy bill, or my energy price.
It's not always transparent.
It's not necessarily known.
So in this case, you can use Eurostat data, and maybe at the extent it's included in network sometimes. And I use only energy tax, and it's included in network, which I didn't do. I didn't check how is it related to network.
It's not really that.
No, I think this would be, well.
It's really not, like if you knew it was included in the pay, like in the UK or whatever, then you'd be able to do analysis with that. But if you think it's in the network charge, it's a different analysis. And you really can't. The pricing information you're talking about is too aggregated to really do this level of accurate.
So when it became a political issue in the UK, there were big arguments about how much was it on the average household bill to cost this policy. Now you can get figures for that, but people could also distort the numbers. I mean, it's not like a number you could look on in your energy bill. It's not on your energy bill. You don't know. You know how much value-added tax is. You know, what rate that is set at, but that's all that you know.
No, this is what you know as a citizen, but what member states report to Eurostat is different.
But they,
in my energy bill in Paris, I receive only the carbon tax and the other the main points, the main consumption. But then France, as all other countries, they report the energy price per household for different components. And one of them is taxes, another one is networks, and then on top of that, the two others, they have four.
But I think it's just, I mean, I'm from America, but I haven't been working in America in the last couple of years, and I think what I see is just what you were saying, that there just isn't enough. I mean, there's so many challenges, but there also just isn't enough momentum for any of this to create the kind of market that they're expecting, even with the certificate. Even if you're having no trouble with your goal, still leaving a lot on the table. That's what I see as.
But one objective of energy efficiency obligations is to mobilize actors within the society, especially the households, to invest in their energy resilience and to carry out their measures.
Right.
Where it needs to be a market mechanism, based on what I know, I've done of it. But that's an also if you would like to move to more challenging innovation practices. So you need to organize that very well. So you need to mobilize, you need to involve all the stakeholders who can do that. I think we'll be matched quite well also by involving suppliers and innovators. It was not only venture cases. The energy companies look for partners.
Well, they've got contractors to put in, but I mean that's not. They haven't done deep renovation, I wouldn't say, but they've done particular measures. That's right. And then when the scheme changes, that market collapses, and all those people go out of business. I mean, it's not really. But,
and also one of the successes in more complex development is that the local authorities started to involve and also to persuade the citizens to take action and also to mobilize citizens in a particular neighborhood to take action.
But I think that citizens should stop paying this energy tax or whatever, wherever it goes, because I don't think anything back. I've stolen, my money is stolen.
Well, you never got any CFLs? That's tragic. You must be the only person in Europe who didn't get any CFLs.
I'm sorry. This is what it means. As an EU citizen, I am paying for something, and I'm not getting my money back.
Yeah, but we can do the calculations to show you that on average you're better off. On average. As a person. You may be one of the unlucky ones who never got anything.
First of all, sorry, I'm one of the persons who is responsible for the European standards and also the Irish standards of the energy performance of buildings for the EPBD. And what we see in many countries is that they say, well, we get more renewable energy, say electricity, in our grid, national grid, so we can improve the primary energy factor for it. So we have a less primary energy used for the electricity in our buildings. So we get better buildings because we have more renewable energy in the national grid. But for instance, here in the Netherlands, I'm also from the Netherlands, all the green electricity is sold with a green certificate. So like the National Railways or Schiphol Airport, they all advertise that they use this green, they are fully green, 100% green. So this is not only double counting, this is triple counting, because you speak about additionality and double counting. But then within the EPBD, for the buildings, you would have another double counting. If you say, well, we have green electricity used by all these companies and also by households with buy the green electricity, and at the same time, this green electricity is used nationwide to say, well, we have better buildings because part of the energy is green. Do you recognize this?
This is so. If the obligation is a form of energy, then that part doesn't play a role.
Well, the obligation is a certain amount of non-renewable primary energy use. So you benefit from
the target is here and total energy that is consumed, which should go down.
Yeah, so the double part, the use of renewable energy.
I don't see a link with the energy efficiency.
You mean in terms of how you would set your savings target if you choose to set it in primary energy rather than delivered?
You have a network part for EPBD, and then you can say, okay, I need these parts, which are 5 million years, and because the national grid is still.
Right.
Okay. But at the same time, the green electricity national grid is counted.
Right.
Okay, so
yeah.
That doesn't count, you know, if the railways and Schiphol are using electricity, that's because of the guarantees of origin, which is a distinct system. So, this underlying is really don't count for.
Has anybody got any further comments or thoughts about this? Or shall we call it done? Or any questions for Paolo, actually, because he didn't get any sort of questions at the end of his session, particularly. We all need a drink.
Can we say that the energy business is complex of the policy point of view? Because if you look at the saving one, the clients have that it's easy to understand. When you go more towards more complex energy efficiency like that, innovation buildings is even a policy of there's no idea of policy, there's no information policy of what happens and implementation of different
I'm not sure it's strange because how do we design this context?
It's basically, my personal experience is obviously areas that I more or less in the same relation to small, with some relation, and as you say, no country formed the same recipe to set up as application. All have good points, bad points, and it seems that it's very difficult to recommend a policy works. It's a lot of complexity, how to raise the money, how to distribute the money, who's going to be the work, who's going to benefit from it. It's complex. Sometimes I understand your point, but it's from a classic perspective that the policymaker it's not so easy because it's interacting with a lot of actors, the citizen, this installation companies, and getting right is
I think what's key is good understanding of the supply chain and delivery of energy efficiency measures. And how the better the policy instrument can influence, can speed up the process, we are more successful if we have a good understanding how the whole cycle runs. That's good.
Yes, that's right. And when you get these big policies that are trying to do a lot of top-down things, often it's the kind of details on the ground, and the bloke who's going to come around and bash something on your wall. That's the bit that can get left off, doesn't it?
That should be serious. But in the pricing, that's very high energy tax, and then the tax will start. Because we know that even that is not enough. Even if the plan is not everybody.
This is a very technical innovation. If it is, I think you also need some illustrations of that innovation, and then that request a specific set up within your energy efficiency obligations in the past, and of the energy efficiency obligations in the once it is mature enough to prepare and enter.
Yeah, I mean, supporting technical innovation is more typically something the governments do directly, isn't it, rather than this sort of scheme. Because, as you say, it's a sort of, it's a complicated process, isn't it, to support technical innovation. Fairly.
It could also use the scheme because it benefits for saving because of the technologies.
Yeah, once it's got into the market, but that pre-market bit is not going to be done by this, is it? I mean, it's not the right policy for that. It will only, it seems like they can do a lot of different things, or they can work in lots of different ways, but they can't do everything, these sorts of policies.